I actually, once upon a time auditioned to be a YTV host.
You mentioned that before, yeah.
Kind of a hilarious experience, but
Oh, okay, that's that. Well, the hilarious experience is always really.
I don't know. For me, it was interesting. It was something. I didn't get it, obviously,
Yeah.
but I think it was worth doing just to see, what that kind of thing was like. And also, I got to go to YTV again, having been there numerous times before. But yeah, after I did the audition, I realized I didn't want to sell things to small children. Products and stuff, and I was like,
Yeah.
I don't really, as I left the interview, I was like, I don't, the producer walked me out, which was probably a good sign to try and talk to me, but at that point I had that, realization of, I don't really want to work here. So, it was kind of a surreal experience, but fun.
Hey everyone, welcome to Zon and Canada. I'm your host, Jesse Betteridge, and we have a special guest on the show today. You may know her as the webmaster of the classic anime information resource website, LA-LI-LU-LELOLA.net. It's Pan. Hey Pan.
Hi, how you doing, Jesse?
I'm doing pretty well myself. How are you finding the internet these days?
Very different than when it was, back when I started LA-LI-LU-LA, but I'm absolutely loving it these days.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think it's a little overrated myself, but I mean, I am pretty much on it perpetually, so I shouldn't criticize. So if you go to LA-LI-LU-LA.net now, you'll find Pan's personal cosplay page. But if you have a few years on you, you might remember that it was once an anime resource website back around the early 2000s. Usually when we look back to major sites from that era, we might be more likely to think of, Anime Jump or sites like Anime Cafe with its ridiculous parent's guide to anime. But LA-LI-LU-LA was a big deal to a lot of people, both inside Canada and out. Or at least that seems to be what I found it to be, back around that era. And so, Pan, what year did you start the website exactly, and what sort of drove you to get it rolling? What was your whole inspiration? What was the deal behind LA-LI-LU-LA.net?
Oh, that's a great question. I started it, I believe, in 1997.
Oh, okay.
And the internet was a very different place in 1997. And what drove me to start it was I didn't know websites existed, back when I was watching a lot of anime in the mid-90s. So, for example, I would be watching Sailor Moon, and I would tape it on a VCR and watch it when I got home after school. And I would pause the screen when I saw a pretty image on the screen. And this was before I knew the term screen cap existed. And I kept wishing, I wish I could somehow print out this image.
You could capture that ephemeral moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or I'd do other things. I would, on this old Windows 3.1 computer, I typed out, I hand wrote the entire Sailor Moon ending credits, and then I typed them all out and just printed them out, and I just had it sitting on my desk because I could. And I was collecting all this information, all this stuff about these series that I liked, and there was sort of no place for them to go. And then a friend of mine showed me this website she made, and it was on one of those free website builders at the time. And, it was it looked like an old GeoCities page. There was middies in the background and bad graphics, 90s graphics, but I thought it was really cool because you could just build this thing and put information or whatever you wanted on it. And I became really excited about making a website. And when I realized that you could make a website for free, I immediately made one, because I think back then it was before the .com bubble burst, and there was this notion that websites meant money, that websites were this expensive thing that was really difficult for people to make. And this is when these free websites like GeoCities, the site that I built LA-LI-LU-LA on was called GoPlay. They were first coming out. So I sort of capitalized on that, and I built the first version of LA-LI-LU-LA on one of these sites. Just to the first version was not very good. It was not even solely anime based. That wasn't until about 1999 when I moved my site. Yeah, when I moved my site to GeoCities, I started to focus on Pokemon and eventually Digimon and Dragon Ball Z, and and then it sort of became this bigger anime website.
So it started out basically as sort of your personal hub.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there was hilarious things on there. I think there was like pictures of like Star Trek Voyager characters, and like there was a Sailor Moon section, and then there was just like really random other stuff. Like I think I had a section dedicated to like Savage Garden middies. Like it was really random.
So
At
it
the
really
very,
was
very
just
beginning.
sort of your personal sandbox. It really
Absolutely.
just started from that and then kind of grew into something really, really substantial to a lot of people from that. That's interesting. I mean, I certainly hope that people don't find my old GeoCities websites if they're still kicking around somewhere, but I mean, the fact that you were actually able to take that kind of groundwork and build it into something substantial, I think that's pretty cool.
Thank you. It was a lot of work. I actually ended up moving to, it didn't really grow into the site that people knew until I moved to a subdomain of another website. And that's when I was able to get like what's called FTP access, which gives you like, yeah. And I basically was able to update the site and do a lot of things with the layout that I could not have done with sites like GeoCities. So that's when the site really took off, is after that.
Yeah, I know that whole journey for sure. So throughout the whole course of the site, did you do everything yourself, including graphic design and any coding you needed to do?
Pretty much. Pretty much. If you actually look at the coding, like I coded everything in Notepad, so it's pretty rudimentary. Even if you ran parts of my site through one of those like HTML checkers to make sure everything is coded well, like you'd find like 50 errors. It was not coded well. It worked. That's what mattered. It was very simple. The layout everyone is familiar with is basically just very simple table coding. In terms of graphics, I did all of that as well, usually using a version of MS Paint from like Windows 98 and a graphics program from around that same era. And those are the same programs I use to this day, and they've held up pretty well considering.
Yeah, I mean, especially with your graphic design, I was just perusing through archive.org and looking at your old stuff.
Oh no! It's still there!
Well, everything is, I'm afraid.
I know.
You still want to see the old Zon in Canada. It's all there. If you look at it, you'll quickly realize why I don't have it up anymore, but it's there. But yeah, the graphic design was good. It holds up pretty well, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's all really, really old programs. And there's the same programs I use to this day. I think is kind of interesting. Like I can use Photoshop, but I don't. But hey, sometimes, the tried and true methods are what work, so.
Speaking of your graphics, I mean, what do you still have more of an affinity for, Yu-Gi-Oh or Cardcaptor Sakura?
Cardcaptor Sakura.
Cardcaptor Sakura?
Cardcaptor Sakura. I love that show. I absolutely love that show. I recently now, probably about 6 years ago now, I bought the entire thing on DVD. It was totally, totally worth it. Totally worth it. Because up until that point, I owned it on a series of fan subs, like bootleg fan subs.
Yeah.
So owning it on DVD and rewatching it on DVD was such a treat. Absolute treat.
You were quite attached to Yu-Gi-Oh as well. Do you still?
Absolutely.
Does it still have a special place in your heart?
It does, in more of a nostalgic way.
Yeah.
I haven't watched or been into Yu-Gi-Oh since it was like airing on YTV.
Yeah.
But, I still loved, like, I remember watching that show on YTV and being so excited about it and cosplaying from it. And so, like, when you're that attached to a series, even for a short period of time, you're always going to resonate with it in some way, right? So I still look back on Yu-Gi-Oh fondly, sometimes with a little bit of laughter involved. But
it never captivated me. The whole Yu-Gi-Oh craze kind of eluded me completely. And I mean, I can't say it was necessarily just because of age either, but
I was technically outside of the demographic for that show, but I still enjoyed it. I don't know why, in some ways, but I definitely enjoyed it. It was fun. I think that was my reasoning. I just had fun watching it.
On your site, you had a real affinity for things that were running on TV, namely stuff on YTV and Fox Kids.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how did you decide what shows to focus things around? Was it just sort of an extension of this idea that LA-LI-LU-LELOLA was just sort of your personal expression of your interests and what you loved as an individual, and that's what warranted, what you collected information on, or what was it, a matter of demand, or just things that you thought were worth cataloging and talking about?
I think it's a bit of both, but I think for the most part, I wanted to make sections, or I was passionate of making these sections about series that I liked, that I enjoyed, that in a lot of ways captured my imagination. And, you know, when you're passionate about something, you're excited about something, that becomes your inspiration in a lot of ways to create. So I think that's where that came from. You know, for example, Digimon, I love Digimon, and Digimon was, and still is, I think, well, now the site's down, but for the longest time was the most popular section of LELOLA. And I was so passionate about Digimon for the longest time. And that fueled me to create sections, to write about it, to do news updates about it, to, you know, to create content. And I think, you know, if I wanted to go online and find information about a show, I figured other people would want to go online and find information as well. So that was sort of how I decided what to focus on.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people had sites that were sort of similar to yours, but I'm still amazed by just the extent of information that was just all gathered and cataloged on there. And it was all done by one person too, which, you know, is
pretty much. There was
impressive.
a couple sections were done by other people. Like my friend made the Fushigi Yugi section, and some other people that I knew made, for example, I think there was a Tenchi Moyo section. Ugh.
I believe. Hey, some people are still attached to that series for some reason. I don't understand.
I've never seen it. I've never seen it.
You know what? I didn't like it then. I never got it. I never understood how that show took off on Toonami. That's always just eluded me. It's weird.
But the sections that I made were like the ones I loved. And I think, I don't know, I think sometimes when you're passionate about something, that just shows, and that resonates with people.
So you started the site in 97, and it eventually gained quite a significant following. How long did that take? Was there anything that you thought kind of spurred that?
Absolutely. So I moved to GeoCities in, I think, 1999. And I think it was a couple years after. It was, I think, around 2000 that I moved to a subdomain where I could control a lot of things. And it was on GeoCities that I started to gain a lot of hits. When I moved to that subdomain, within a couple months, I had more hits than the site that was hosting me. Like, very, very quickly. Digimon was the big thing. Digimon was on YTV, it was on Fox Kids, it was this huge thing. I loved it. Everyone I was talking to was watching it. We all were enjoying it, and I was, you know, updating constantly about it. And I think that brought in a lot of hits to the site. And I think one thing that I think made my website so popular was that I consistently made daily, like I had daily updates. I updated every single day something. And so every day someone knew if they clicked on my website, there would be something new there. And a lot of websites didn't do that. And it kept people coming back because, I don't know, like you're browsing the web, you know, if you come to my website, there's going to be something new for you to look at. It might just be a comment. It might just be a new picture of the week. It might just be, you know, who knows what, but there's going to be new content for you. So I think that brought in a lot of people. And I think it was, I'm not 100% sure, but I think by like 2001, 2002, I had broken like over 1 million hits back then, which was a really big deal at the time. We forget, like, YouTube uses more bandwidth in a day right now than the entire internet used in a year back then, right? Mm-hmm. So it was a very big deal. And my updates were also very, like, kind of blog-ish. I didn't know what the term blog was.
I don't even know if it existed for a lot of the time at that point.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, like, but it was very sort of blog-ish. Like, it wasn't just like, here's this update. It was written in first person. I put a lot of myself into the site. So my daily updates, it was like this almost like daily update / my anime blog was sort of how, the site took off. Yeah.
Did it ever seem like a balancing act to you to have the personal aspect of the site and sort of the informational aspect of the site? These days, we see those as completely different things online. I mean, we have wikis for information, and we have social media sites like Tumblr or Twitter for sort of constructing our online identities or expressing ourselves online. But did you ever find it to be a challenge in balancing it, or did it seem natural?
It's just what I did. Like, I mean, that notion of that split didn't really exist yet. again, the notion of what a blog is didn't really exist yet, at least in like sort of the popular imagination. So I was just doing what I was doing. I wasn't necessarily conscious that I was, doing something that would be seen today as different. But I think, for me, giving yourself, like putting parts of yourself into your content was something that was really important to me. That became in some ways part of the draw for the website. So I remember when I finally took the website down and stopped updating it, I felt really strange. Like I felt like Wikipedia's and all these, like the ability to just Google and find a website that will give you straight information, I found that sort of intimidating at the time. I was like, well, I can't compete with all these sites that are being updated by 20, 30, who knows how many people. There's this, you go to Google, you type in something, you can hit, Wikipedia's, you can hit all these other sites that'll give you all this information, and often a very non-personal kind of way. And I found that very intimidating. I found that, okay, well, I can't compete with these websites.
So you saw it as more a matter of competition rather than a matter of things growing in a different way?
Competition is not sort of the right word. I think it seemed, I think I'm going to use the word intimidating again. I think It was just like, I don't know. I think I felt like the internet was changing and I was sort of almost being left behind by that change, right? Like people were looking for this much more impersonal information rather than this sort of like bloggy like content. That's at least how I felt at the time. My views on that have sort of changed, especially with sites like Tumblr, where you sort of insert yourself, in your commentary, etc. You end up inserting yourself again into your the way you feel about certain shows. But I mean, this is probably around 2007, somewhere between 2005 and 2007, I felt that there was like this shift happening. And I felt like my website was sort of almost like a relic of the past as I saw this shift happening.
You mentioned Tumblr as sort of a vehicle for engaging with fandom, which the way we see people act on Tumblr and the way that we see people talk about their fandoms, talk about fandoms related to, fan works, fan art, fan fiction, and their relation to things like social issues as well. The way it all ties together on Tumblr. It's not exactly something new, but the fact that it's kind of been distilled and divorced from the sort of information building aspect is still a fairly recent thing. I mean, what is your attitude toward sort of the wiki culture or the sort of information building culture that we see on the other side?
I think it's actually, for the most part, despite, regardless of what I just said, I think it's actually pretty cool to be able to just type in something on Google and get information on it. Mm-hmm. I've only recently learned that there are companies paid to like edit Wikipedia. And that's made me a little bit more wary of sites like that. But
it's definitely not something that we should see as entirely democratic, that's for sure.
For sure.
Even though it purports itself to be.
Absolutely. But I think it's really cool to be able to, like, there's so much more out there on the internet today is sort of what I'm getting at. There's so many more resources. I'm a little bit jealous of youth today that get to grow up with all these resources, this ability to access, for example, like I'm a cosplayer, access, thousands of tutorials on how to build things that none of this information existed when I started cosplaying, or access a lot of, for example, social justice issues, like information on social justice issues. I think there's fantastic resources out there that didn't exist 10 years ago. And I think that's wonderful. I think that's absolutely wonderful.
A lot of things like that relating to social justice and feminism. I'm sort of getting into what I'm writing my thesis on here, of course. A lot of it has been around for ages, but it's never been as open as it is now. Back, I mean, there were Usenet groups that dealt with feminism, and of course you had LiveJournal communities, which were largely, usually sort of sectioned off or blocked to outsiders, and the same with the Usenet groups. They were usually heavily moderated because trolls were always a persistent issue whenever you're talking about things like that online.
Yeah, and you also had things like, I'm thinking of the 90s, you had zine culture, you had a lot of offline, it sounds really strange. This sentence is going to sound really strange, but like
we're talking about the 90s, so we kind of have to put it in a different perspective.
Feminism, social justice, none of this is new. it's sort of newish on the internet in the way we're understanding it and the way we see it now. But I mean, these issues have been around for a very, very, very long time, and people have been engaging in discussing these issues and working through these issues and, you know, advocating for justice, et cetera, for a very, very, very long time. And I think that needs to be remembered in some ways.
It's only thanks to social media platforms that use hashtags, give people a banner to gather under, that you've really been able to attract visibility to things. Because especially on Tumblr, you can put multiple hashtags on something. So you can it can go under your fandom hashtag and the hashtag for a social issue, which just sort of exposes people who are just looking for, Teen Wolf or Sherlock pictures to a whole bunch of stuff they may never have expected to find.
Absolutely, and there are fantastic critiques of both of those shows that exist out there.
And it's interesting when we see social justice issues come up on social media with this sort of unprecedented level of exposure. And I think the way that people react to that sort of new level of exposure, I find that it dictates a lot of the sort of politics and communication that we see online these days too.
For sure. I also find it really, really informative because, it's like being in a media studies class in some ways. It's that information that you wouldn't always have access to otherwise. So like, let me try and put that another way. So let's say you're watching a show and you go online and you read this really, really good critique, let's say about disability. Mm-hmm. And it's a perspective that you would normally, in your day-to-day life, you might not have, especially about that piece of media. And suddenly you have access to it. And it changes if you're open to these kind of critiques. It can, I feel like, be really, really informative and humbling, and in a lot of cases can be really wonderful because it can change the way you think about certain pieces of media. It can expose you to critiques you had no idea about before. It can make you, when you're watching a different show, say, wait a second, does that critique from this show apply also to this show? Can make you question, your own, let's say, able-bodied privilege, whatever it is. So I think that these, let's say, social justice critiques we're seeing of a lot of popular culture, popular media is actually really, really fantastic from my perspective.
Do you think that the sort of backlash we're seeing against, people complaining about things like social justice warriors, which is such a strange, I would argue that the term used to have some degree of nuance to it, but ever since Gamergate, it's just become a complete pejorative that means nothing. And it's also such a weird pejorative too, because social justice and warrior, I would think are all kind of positive terms to attribute to something. Maybe not warrior, but I'd imagine that most Gamergaters are pro-war, so they would find it to be positive. But do you think that this sort of backlash is a temporary thing? Do you think that as people get more immersed in awareness, that things will improve, or do you think this backlash is going to intensify?
I don't know if that's a question I can actually answer. I think that, what I would love to see is that people be open to these critiques and these different ways of understanding the world that might be very different than their own, or, might make people uncomfortable. I mean, recognizing that you have privilege makes you uncomfortable generally, right? So I think there's a lot of just automatic defensiveness when certain arguments are brought up. But I think that it's so important to have these conversations. And in an ideal world, I would hope that it would, greater awareness would make these sort of critiques more, I don't know how I feel about this term, but more mainstream. Mm-hmm. So that they were considered almost like the quote unquote norm, and these ridiculous challenges were not seen as the norm. I think, ideally, I would love to see these kind of critiques taken a lot more seriously in the mainstream. I think there's a lot of value in them. Again, we're seeing, a lot of perspectives that we did not necessarily see online, or did not see online, did not have access to online like we do today. To the extent that we do today, we're hearing all these voices, and I think it's so important that these voices get heard. I think ideally I would love to see this greater awareness change the way people think about the world. But I don't know if I can actually answer that question because it's a big one, and I have no idea.
It is a big question, I know.
I have no idea what the future holds. I know what I want the future to hold. I know the future that I would like to, help build. But that's all I can really answer, sadly.
I think that leads into my next question at the very least. How do you feel that you've changed as a person since the time you ran the old LA-LI-LU-LELOLA?
I think it's easy for me to forget how young I was when I was running this site. So in 1997, I think I was about 12. Well, I know I was about 12 years old. I was really, really young, and the
Yeah.
site was really popular between like 2000 to 2003-ish. And what was I, 15 to 18? And when I go back and I reread content on the site, I cringe. I think it sounds sort of awful, and I feel like it doesn't sound like me. But that's because it was in a lot of ways written by a different person. A lot of people resonated and liked it, and I liked it at the time, but how many of us are like, as we get older, how many of us are still the people we were in our teens, And that person, who I was in my teens is part of me, informed who I've become. But I think one of the reasons I find reading the site kind of cringeworthy and embarrassing is it's kind of my awkward teen years in website form.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm like, oh.
Up there for all to see.
Yeah, and it's on, as you pointed out, it's on archive. So I'm like, oh, great. That's wonderful.
I'm sorry for advertising that.
It's okay, but I think, I grew up so much in my 20s. I mean, you have like life experiences, you have good things happen to you, bad things happen to you. I feel like I've learned a lot about compassion and humility and vulnerability and being open to different ways of knowing, to challenge the ways I look in the world. And as we've already sort of discussed, I'm a big social justice person in real life, and I don't think I could have been that person. I was not in a place where I could have been that person back then. But at the same time, that happened to be who I was at the time. So I think I've changed quite a bit, but it is really like when I read the site, it's my awkward teen years.
What about the community surrounding the site? I can't remember if there was a forum or if it was just comment fields or if you just interacted with people through email. What were your experiences with that?
It was mostly through email, and it was mostly really positive. I got actually way too many emails for me to reply to on my own, but I tried anyway. I was getting at some point somewhere between 300 and 400 emails a week.
Wow.
It was ridiculous. And I would come home from school and do my homework. I was in high school. And I would come home from school, do my homework, and then I'd reply to emails for like 3 or 4 hours. And it was a little bit overwhelming. But most of the things people sent me, like most of the messages people sent me, were very, very positive. I had a couple negative, unsettling experiences, but for the most part, it was really wonderful. And I also did, once upon a time, I did a segment on YTV about cosplay. And to this day, I think people come up to me and, tell me, I was the one who introduced them to cosplay. And I always feel very happy and very humbled when I hear that.
Right. Was that on one of their Anime North sort of segments?
Yeah. Yes, it was. And then I still get messages to this day. I got a message like a week and a half ago on my DeviantArt, I think. And someone sent me a message and they were saying, I was talking to friends and we were talking about websites we used to visit back in the day, and we remembered your website, and I visited it, and I found your cosplay site, and then I found your DeviantArt, and I'm sending you this message. And I find that kind of thing, I don't know, it still blows my mind. I've gotten a lot of them over the years, but I'm still like, you remember my website, 1. 2, you've tracked me down to tell me this story. And that to me is amazing. And I'm sort of in some ways overwhelmed with feelings when I hear that.
I'm just kind of blown away by the fact that you would get so many emails, that your sort of personal site meant so much to all these people, to the point that you got over 400 emails a week. I can't even imagine that.
I think it was probably closer to like 250 to 350. There was some week.
That is still
bad.
A lot.
Yeah, it's still a lot. And I was really bad with replying to them promptly. That was the other thing. I got so overwhelmed all the time. But yeah, and people would send me sometimes just, sometimes it would just be commentary on something I posted because I didn't have a comment section. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times email acted as sort of like the comment section on my website. But sometimes it was on like content. Sometimes people were submitting content. And sometimes people would just be like, how you doing? what's up kind of thing too, right? So it definitely ran. It was a very wide range of emails I got, and I had someone who wrote like sent me an email like clockwork, like once a week. She wrote like a fanfic about me and her, and like
Oh, wow.
the
The
Rock.
greatest honor of them all.
I know, and then like I think it had the Rock in it for some reason, and I don't know. She sent me like a new chapter every week, and I thought that was kind of cool actually. I think I printed out some of those emails. They're somewhere in my basement.
Now now I just wish, you'd make an appearance in one of the new Fast and the Furious movies.
Oh no. But yeah, it was, definitely had an impact on people's lives. And it's something that to this day I don't, cause again, when I look back at this website, I'm like, it's my awkward teen years. Oh gosh, oh no. Right. But that definitely resonated with people.
I still find it amazing. Like when you look back at the other sites, like I mentioned at the beginning, other sites that sort of categorized and made information. I just find it amazing that you get that much feedback. I mean, you didn't have a forum like many sites, but just the fact that people would want to, engage with you that directly, that's not something you see today at all.
It was really cool. It was definitely overwhelming. Like I have sort of like, I'm really bad at checking email to this day, replying to emails, because I sort of like, I now check my email like once a day and that's it, because I still have this like lingering feeling of being overwhelmed from back then, because I would like clear my inbox and I'd like check like an hour later and be like, no, the work is all back. I didn't mind the work in some ways. It was really nice. It was just, to get these messages, it was just very overwhelming for me. And I didn't, to this day, I don't know how exactly, I'm still like blown away by that response.
Again, your site was unique in a lot of ways. Was there anything you thought was uniquely Canadian about it?
Absolutely. I think, especially for the first sections that were on the website, all the anime I was watching was anime that was on Canadian television. Like we're talking, what it was on there, Sailor Moon, Digimon, Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, a Monster Rancher. These were all shows that I was watching on mostly YTV and Fox Kids. I also did, I'm going to date myself here, I used to do like maybe one of my daily updates every week would be, I'd go through the paper TV guide that came in the Saturday newspaper, which don't exist anymore, and I would like go through the listings and I'd pull out all the YTV anime listings and Fox Kids anime listings that would air in, I guess, the Toronto area, which is where I am. Yeah. And I would just compile them into a list. So if you're interested in watching, anime on Canadian TV this week, here's what you can find. Also, when I started going to conventions, pretty much all my coverage was of Canadian conventions and Toronto area conventions. So that was also Canadian content for sure.
I remember you came to that one Anime Evolution.
I think I went to 2 Anime Evolutions.
Oh, 2? Oh, I missed you at one of them then.
I'm not sure. Yeah, that was a fun experience. One of those Anime Evolutions was really surreal for me. It was a couple years after one of those like Anime North cosplay segments that I was in had ran on YTV, and I wore the same costume, an upgraded version of the same costume I had worn in that segment to Anime Evolution. And this is really random, but I had this, it was a character named Goku from anime called Sayuki. And when I was first interviewed by YTV in this costume, I had this wooden staff. It was a red staff and it had like, almost like gold detailing at the end. And I made the detailing at the end out of foam golf balls that I painted. And they were shown off in this segment on YTV. But when I went to Anime Evolution, I built a whole new wooden, like, staff, and it was all completely made of wood. And when I was walking around in Anime Evolution, people kept coming up and touching my staff.
Oh.
And I couldn't figure out why. And then it dawned on me, they were trying to figure out if it was made of foam golf balls and to figure out if I was the same person they saw on television. And it was like, what? It was kind of a really surreal experience.
Also, if I recall correctly, your site was the one that first broke the news of Inuyasha starting on YTV too.
It might have been. Yeah. I don't remember.
I distinctly remember you beat me to that one.
Yeah,
or rather, that's where I found out.
I had a couple really good contacts actually at YTV. that helped me out with some of that stuff. I was really, really lucky. And if that person is listening to this right now, thank you. And they got me a few scoops over the years, for sure. It was really kind of cool.
There are some really good people at YTV, for sure.
Absolutely.
Do you ever watch the network now?
No.
No?
I barely watch television these days.
It's not for us, but from what I've seen, I respect what they're doing. I think it seems to work for them. It seems to be well run. So.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still active in the cosplay scene. Can you tell us anything about what sort of you're up to with that these days?
I'm still cosplaying. I haven't been cosplaying necessarily anime characters lately because I haven't been honestly watching that much anime. I've been cosplaying a lot of, like, for example, comic book characters because that's what I was up to recently. Like, that was what I was reading.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still doing it. I still love it. I'm actually making anime costumes for Anime North this year. I'm doing a Sailor Moon, like, school uniform, and I'm thinking of re-wearing Naruto because I recently reread/finished the manga. But I'm still very much into cosplay. I still absolutely love it. Love it.
I saw the picture of your Go-Go Power Ranger, and I think that I still chuckle at that every now and again. It was really good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That was a lot of work for a terrible pun. And for anyone listening who's not sure what this is I made a historically accurate 1960s, like out of a pattern from the 1960s, go-go dress, but I patterned it after like the Mighty Morphin pink Power Ranger. And I wore it with go-go boots. So it was a go-go Power Ranger. I think it's hilarious. Every so often, I've worn that at a couple conventions, and every so often people like do a double take. And you can tell that they've got it, and the rest of people are like, I don't understand. What is she doing?
To be honest, I probably wouldn't understand without a prompt of some kind.
But I think it's fun. Like, that's one of the reasons I love cosplaying. It's a lot of fun for me.
And you're still following Power Rangers stuff too, aren't you?
I am. I didn't watch the most recent series before. Currently what's airing is Dino Charge, but I didn't really watch Megaforce, but
Megaforce is the best. And by that I mean it's the worst.
That's why I've seen 3 episodes. I couldn't bring myself to watch more than that.
Megaforce is interesting because I find the cast is actually extremely likable, but just as a show, it's bad on every level. The script is bad. As an adaptation, it's bad, and then it's mashed together with Super Megaforce, where they take those 2 shows, Go Kiger and Go whatever it was called. I can't remember the exact Sentai titles, but they mash it together in this completely incomprehensible manner. And then we have Robo Knight, who he's a magic. Actually, I was introduced to the show. I don't follow Power Rangers, but somebody showed me the Christmas specials, Power Rangers Megaforce, Robo Knight Before Christmas. It is the most outrageous thing I have ever seen. Robo Knight wants to learn more about Christmas, so he poses as a toy in a shopping mall, and then he gets taken away.
What?
Yeah, but it turns out all these toys are being donated to needy children, and this lady comes in and says, "Oh, we have to get these toys to Africa as soon as possible." So he gets shipped.
This is awful.
It's probably even worse than you're imagining right now.
No good can come of this.
No good does come of it. I was blown away by this. I couldn't believe it was made in 2013. You could watch it on Netflix if you want. It's there.
Okay. I skipped it. I watched Samurai the season before it, which was not a good season. It was very stiff. They copied the storyboards from the Japanese series, and it's a very Japanese series. Samurai was based on a.
I heard it was actually a faithful adaptation, but just didn't work.
It didn't work in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think, like Megaforce, they didn't give the cast a lot of things to do. Like, they weren't allowed. There was no space for passion or for being interesting. It was like, follow the script as robotically as possible. I think that was problem 1. And especially with Samurai, we've never had an East Asian Red Ranger, okay? We've never had one in 20 whatever years we're up to now. And here's a show where the Red Ranger's name is Jaden Shiba, and they hired a white actor. And I'm really angry at casting for that.
It is that is just
to this day.
That is painfully ironic on a few levels, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'm so angry about that because this would have been the perfect chance, to have in this case, a Japanese Red Ranger. And you technically had a Japanese Red Ranger. You had a very Japanese show. I mean, the show was called Samurai. There's kanji everywhere. Like, it's a show that could have been a lot better than it was. And they could have probably taken a little bit more chances with it than they did. The good news is that the current Power Ranger series, there's only been like 8 episodes of it. Dino Charge. It's not unproblematic, but it's a fun series. It's sort of like what Power Rangers has been lacking for like the last 4 years. So I'm really, really, really enjoying it and very excited about it.
I haven't watched it, but I noticed there's quite a bit of diversity in the cast in that one too, which is...
It's wonderful. Yeah. And the cast is aware of the representation going on in the show. Like, they're very, very aware, and they're very open to talking to their fans about it. It's kind of wonderful. It's sort of this reversal of what we saw in previous seasons in some way. But it's not unproblematic. I mean, the Blue Ranger is like a caveman, and just it still has issues. Yeah, it still has like some not so great issues. But compared to the previous season, it's fun. It's actually a fun season to watch. It's actually fun.
I watched a bit of RPM because I was also led to that one. I was quite surprised by that one. It has the opposite problem of most of these Power Rangers shows, where the Western footage that they've shot is substantially more interesting than the Sentai footage that they're adapting. Well,
I mean,
they really went all out with that. It's like, it's dark and edgy, but not in that stupid dark, edgy Power Rangers trailer that just came out a couple months ago kind of way, but in a way that's actually smart and works.
And that's still, aimed at a younger audience. Yeah, no, RPM was fantastic. You had this post-apocalyptic Power Ranger series produced by Disney that, and the Japanese footage they were trying to adapt is kind of like a joke, which is...
Yeah, it was a parody. It was a parody show.
Yeah, this RPM had this sort of like meta sense about that, so they'd sort of make fun of themselves, which I also appreciated. But RPM is a pretty solid show. Halfway through, I think they fired the producer.
I heard about that, yeah.
Yeah, and so, like, the producer left and took a lot of his ideas with him. So the series, there's a lot of things in the series that were heading for something different, and that never really, it was never, what you were hoping for never quite happened, but they still resolved it in a pretty decent way, I think. So, it's a pretty solid series, for sure.
Yeah. Recommend it if you haven't checked it out. It's pretty surprising.
For sure. Just watch the first episode of RPM, and you'll, if you haven't watched Power Rangers in a long time or never watched it, you will probably be surprised.
Yeah. So my original plan was actually to try and get you on one of the roundtable discussions about TV we did, but given how our conversation has gone today, clearly there was a lot more we could talk about in terms of LA-LI-LU-LELOLA. Oh yeah, one other question. What did LA-LI-LU-LELOLA mean again?
I had a friend, the same friend who showed me like the website she made, and she kept saying the phrase, she put like L and like all sorts of like vowels together, and the first 3 that she put together were like Li-Lo-La, I think it was Li-Li or whatever, Li-Lu, whatever. And I just really kind of liked it, and I was just trying to come up with a username, so I just put it in. It doesn't really have any fancy meaning or anything like that. It was just, I need to create a username. Okay, this works.
That just makes me think of LA-LI-LU-LELOLA from Metal Gear Solid 2. We don't have to talk about we don't need to talk about that though. No. So anyway, I plan to have you on one of the roundtables, but obviously there was more we can talk about on a one-on-one interview. But I'd still like to ask you the questions that I asked the roundtable participants as well.
Sure.
So the first one, I think we kind of already covered it a little bit, but what really standout memories do you have of anime on Canadian TV?
Oh, wow. I think the first anime I really watched, I'm not sure which one it is, but it's either Samurai Pizza Cats or Techno Man. Mm-hmm. And Techno Man, I think it was only aired on UPN, but for reasons I don't understand, my Fox affiliate was showing it. And I watched that show so much. I absolutely adored it. And I don't think I could watch it again now, especially realizing how heavily it was cut up for, North American television. But I really, really loved it. And of course I watched, Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z. Sailor Moon was this huge thing for me that, I feel like changed my life. Pokemon, Escaflowne, Digimon, Gundam Wing. Yu-Gi-Oh, those were like these big series for me. And I watched them like, I would have probably have not watched them had they not been on Canadian TV. And also, like, they introduced me to other things. So, like, Escaflowne, I was super excited about. And I ended up going to a comic book shop downtown and buying, like, a VHS box set that was put out by animevillage.com.
Oh, yeah.
Right? But that introduced me to, like, okay, you can get, like, official subs sometimes and things like that. So, like, these shows introduced me to these other shows and other, like, access to, like, information and subs, et cetera, about anime.
Yeah. I remember with Escaflowne, that was actually, I was renting the subbed videos as YTV was airing the dubbed series, and I was comparing them. And, like I pointed out before, I was surprised by how few changes there were towards the end when they weren't editing it for Fox anymore.
And especially the second time around. The second airing was...
Oh, at the end, they aired the first episode with it the second time around, which is cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, some of those series that I mentioned don't hold up that well. You had a really good conversation about Gundam Wing, I think, in your last episode.
Oh, yeah.
I tried to rewatch that, and I remember watching that in middle school and thinking it was the coolest thing, and look at all these, like, big political issues, and oh my gosh, and then rewatching it a couple years ago, and I didn't even finish it. I was like, this is how politics work. This is really simple. I used to think this was really complicated. There's, like, no character building. What's going on?
Did you ever watch Seed?
No, I didn't. I watched bits and pieces of Seed, but I didn't watch Seed.
Mm-hmm.
No, I was sort of out of watching anime, I think, at that time, mostly because I was in school and I didn't have that much time. But yeah,
I guess you didn't follow Bionics all the way through.
I just definitely did not follow Bionics. I pretty much at all. I was that was around the time when I stopped watching a lot of anime. Sadly.
That said, still, do you think there were any missed opportunities for anime on TV?
I think I would have had a lot more answers to this question about a decade ago. But since I haven't been watching that much anime since then, I was thinking of this after listening to your previous shows. I was thinking of, like, how cool it would have been to have more shows that were like the Anti-Gravity Room. And, at the time when LELOLA was like really popular, people were so hungry for information about anime. And there wasn't as much info out there as there is today. So it would have been really cool to have shows or things that would give people access to that information. I always loved behind the scenes stuff. So I remember, I don't have it on tape, but I remember The Zone in like 1995, maybe early 96. I have this vague memory of them visiting the studio in Toronto where they dubbed Sailor Moon. And they did this like behind the scenes tour. The voice of Luna like was sort of their guide. And they were looking at merchandise and they were looking at all this stuff. And it was so exciting for me. It was like the coolest thing because it was this behind the scene look at this show that I was absolutely adored, this show that had captured my imagination. And I would have loved to have more, at the time, now there's the internet, but at the time, like more television shows that gave us sort of that behind the scenes access to a lot of that kind of stuff. I think that would be really cool. What else? I think
that's a great thing that I think was unique about YTV and, probably still is something they do is the way they present things just beyond the text. They dig under the text and just sort of present it like the whole production around it as well. I mean, they're back in '95. They were probably one of the only networks that were actually not only showing anime but talking about it and presenting it as this discernible thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And like Anti-Gravity Room was also talking about comic books and video games, and I actually went and I looked up some of the clips on YouTube of the old shows, and they're interviewing, industry professionals, and there's this like kind of in a lot of ways this behind the scenes look of like how the logic behind the capitalism behind the merchandising and things like that. Like it's kind of a really interesting show, and it makes transparent a lot of things that are more hidden even today. It was really fantastic, and I would have loved to see something more like that. Even today, I think a show like that could probably still work, depending on how you do it. Other missed opportunities, I think, especially maybe about a decade ago, shows, maybe a little bit before that, shows like Get Backers and Prince of Tennis. These are shows that had a huge like fandom, a huge following, and they didn't really air. I don't even think Get Backers ever aired on a North American television.
Prince of Tennis aired on Toonami for a little bit.
Yeah, and I don't know how it did there, but
I don't think it did well. But the entire block was sort of on a downturn at that point, so I don't think you could really fairly assess it.
Yeah, but I think like that show, you know, had such a large, and still this day still has a really large fan base. So I think like shows like that, I think would have been kind of cool to see on a station like YTV. Has any station ever showed Madoka?
In Australia, yeah, not in Canada.
Because
Madoka would be a cool thing to see on TV as well. You'd have to get, you know, it would have to show up on a network that really knows the content, knows what they're doing, knows how to present it, knows how to pitch it. But if you know what you're doing with a show like Madoka, it could be pretty huge.
Yeah, so I think that would be my answer to that question.
Yeah. So, do you have any expectations for the future? Maybe not of anime on TV, but of television in general?
Well, I'm glad you sort of clarified that, because I don't watch television, or definitely don't watch anime on television. I'm streaming things on Crunchyroll now and then, and that's about it. But I don't know. I honestly don't know. I would love to see more representation in general on television of anyone who isn't a white straight dude.
Yeah.
To be very frank, I would love it. I think that would be what I really would love to see more on television, and more diverse storytelling. There's a great post going around on Tumblr of like all the shows on CW and how they're like basically all like just this wall of pictures of white, pretty much, except for I think one, white straight people. And that really shows, you know, there's so many stories that we're not hearing. There's so many stories that could be told. There's so many people that don't get to see themselves represented, and I would love to see, you know, more diversity for sure on television.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. CW in particular, I mean, they really, they really thrive off the whole, you know, two white guys who aren't really gay, but kind of,
queer baiting fun times.
Queer baiting fun times, exactly.
Yeah.
I did get one question submission, this week. You probably can't really answer it because, it's about sort of the later Bionics. It's from Muhammad Advol, who I don't think is actually the JoJo's Bizarre Adventure character, but he's borrowing his name for this. He asked, what would you say killed Bionics? Was it a show? I don't think it was any particular show. I think it just had to do with politics and the direction that the station was going. I remember hearing that there were some staff shuffles going around on the show around the time that Bionics ended. You know, the shift to Saturdays from Fridays happened after Death Note ended. I don't think it had anything to do with Death Note. I think it was just allowing that show to end on its own terms and then shifting the block away to Saturday to die, essentially. I really like what Mark said back in the first episode about the idea about this perception that anime as a fad was ending and wasn't worth pursuing anymore. And while it is kind of true that the anime fad was going away, I don't think that makes anime no longer worthwhile to sort of pursue. And I think when you have a large diverse medium with anime, I think you need to recognize and understand the potential that you have with that kind of content. But I don't think it was because of any one show. Yeah, so that's it for the question submissions. I am going to say we're doing an episode soon on online streaming specifically, and we want to talk about issues like accessibility in Canada, the tendency for people to use services like Hola or other VPNs to get around geo-blocking, whether people find this to be ethical, or whether or not, we should accept a status quo where we just use them. Is it okay for companies to just silently condone their use? Should they be more actively including the Canadian audience in this kind of thing? I want to do a full episode exploring that in the near future. I want to hear what you guys think about issues like accessibility in online streaming, use of VPNs, the certain ethics surrounding all these things, what could change for the better. You can either submit your thoughts to me on the contact form at zonin.ca or tweet me at jbetteridge. So Pan, thanks a lot for coming on the show today. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Alright, that was Zon in Canada. I hope you enjoyed the show. Big thanks to Pan for stopping by today. As always, you can find me at zonin.ca. Theme song is by Ultra Clystron. You can check out his stuff at ultraclystron.com. If you know anyone who might like this show, please recommend it. See you all next time.